Imagine walking home one chilly evening, the streets dimly lit by flickering lamps, and realizing that a small, scruffy stray dog has been trailing behind you for days. He's not begging for food or barking for attention, just quietly following, his eyes filled with something you can't quite place. Why is he following you? What does he want? The question lingers as you find yourself unable to ignore him any longer. Little do you know, this dog is about to change your life in ways you never imagined. Keep watching, because this story is unlike anything you've ever heard. It was a regular Tuesday afternoon when I first noticed the stray dog. I was walking back from the grocery store, bags in hand, the cool breeze brushing against my face. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of peacefulness you only find in suburbs where life moves slowly. As I passed the usual landmarks, a small park, the old brick building on the corner, and the diner I frequented, the dog appeared. At first, I thought it was just another stray, aimlessly wandering. But then I saw his eyes. There was something different about this dog. He wasn't like the others I'd seen before, agitated, hungry, or looking for attention. This one was calm, almost too calm, and he kept his distance. He followed me from a few feet away, matching my pace as if he knew exactly where I was going. I couldn't help but feel uneasy, but then again, what could I do? He wasn't bothering anyone. I didn't think much of it that day. But as the days passed, I noticed him more and more. Every time I left the house, whether to go to the store, take a walk, or even just get some fresh air, he was there, always following. Sometimes he'd sit a few steps behind me, watching like he was guarding me from afar. Other times he'd pause in his tracks, waiting for me to catch up before continuing at the same pace. He wasn't like the other stray dogs I'd seen around the neighborhood. They'd either approach you for food or beg for attention, but not this dog. He seemed different. His fur was unkempt, his ribs were visible, and his paws looked sore, as if he had walked a long distance. But despite the rough condition he appeared to be in, there was a sense of loyalty in his actions. It was as though he was waiting for something, maybe me, maybe something else. And every time I would stop to look back at him, he'd be there, staring at me with those same deep eyes. He was waiting for me to make a move. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself it was just a coincidence. But after a few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than I understood. Who was this dog? Why was he following me? And what was his story? One evening, I couldn't take it any longer. I stopped and turned to face him, my curiosity overtaking me. As I walked toward him, his ears perked up, but he didn't run away. He just stood there, watching me as if he knew I had questions. I knelt down, extending my hand cautiously. To my surprise, he didn't hesitate. He slowly approached me, sniffing my fingers before sitting down by my feet, like he'd known me forever. In that moment, I knew there was something more to this than just a stray dog looking for food or shelter. There was a connection, something I couldn't explain. He followed me every day after that, but now it felt different. I wasn't just the person he was trailing. I was the person he trusted. But still, I had no idea why. Little did I know the answer would come soon, and it would change everything. Days turned into weeks, and the stray dog's presence became a regular part of my routine. At first, I was hesitant to get too close, unsure of whether the dog was simply lost or had some deeper connection to me. But as time passed, I started to wonder, why was he following me? Why was he so insistent, even after I'd ignore him or take a different route? It didn't make sense. Was it fate? Or was there something about me that drew him in? As I went about my daily life, the dog remained a constant shadow. He would wait outside my door, pacing in front of the gate, every time I stepped out. At times, I'd hear a soft bark or the clicking of his paws as he followed behind me, but I never saw him approach. He kept his distance, as though respecting some invisible boundary. Sometimes, when I'd take a moment to stop and sit on the bench in the park near my apartment, the dog would sit beside me without hesitation. He would stare out at the horizon, his eyes fixed on something far away, but his attention never wavered from me. I found it odd at first, almost eerie, but something about it made me feel safe, like I wasn't alone in a world that often felt overwhelming. There were moments when I tried to push him away, hoping that the strange feeling in my chest would fade if I just ignored it. But no matter what, he always showed up, his quiet presence becoming harder to ignore. I found myself talking to him at times, telling him about my day or venting my frustrations, as if he understood every word. And though I never expected a response, he would listen. He would sit by me in silence, his presence a comforting constant. But as the days went on, I began to notice something strange. The dog was starting to change. His condition, which had once been rough and worn, seemed to improve. His coat was shinier, and he no longer limped as much when walking. It was subtle, but it was there. He seemed stronger, healthier, almost as though he was being taken care of in some way. I couldn't explain how or why this transformation was happening, but it was hard to ignore. One afternoon, as I walked home from work, I noticed the dog sitting at the same spot he had been for the past few days, outside the little cafe on the corner. He was waiting for me, as always, but this time there was something different about the way he looked at me. His gaze was intense, almost pleading, and for the first time, I felt like there was something he wanted to tell me, something I wasn't seeing. In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just a dog following me out of curiosity or desperation. There was a deeper reason behind his presence, a purpose that had yet to be revealed. But what could it be? That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the dog. I'd already tried every logical explanation in my mind. Maybe he was just lonely, searching for companionship in a city full of strangers. Or maybe he had once belonged to someone nearby and had gotten lost. But none of these explanations seemed to fit the bond one was beginning to feel. The dog wasn't just a stray. He was something more, something that seemed to be searching for something in me, something that I had yet to understand. I started to pay closer attention to the dog's behavior. Every day, he would follow me without fail, his every move a silent testament to his loyalty. But there was one thing that puzzled me. He never seemed to approach anyone else. People would walk by, barely noticing the dog, but he would never follow them. It was as if he was waiting for me, waiting for something only I could give him. And then, as I walked down the familiar street one afternoon, something caught my eye. A small patch of dirt in the corner of the sidewalk, a place where the dog had often stopped to sniff. I bent down, trying to make sense of the scene before me. That's when I noticed something that stopped me cold, a tiny, crumpled piece of paper half buried in the ground. I unfolded it carefully, my heart pounding. It was a letter, old and faded, but legible enough to read. The words on the page were simple, yet they carried a weight I could feel deep in my chest. Max, I'll always be with you. Please wait for me. I'll be back. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The dog wasn't just following me out of instinct or desperation. He was waiting for someone. And that someone had left him behind. The dog's name was Max, and his story was far more heart-wrenching than I could have imagined. As I stood there, holding the letter in my hands, I realized that Max wasn't just a stray dog anymore. He was a dog with a mission, a dog whose loyalty knew no bounds. But who was he waiting for? And why had he chosen me to follow? The discovery of Max's name and the letter marked a turning point in my journey with the dog. With newfound determination, I made it my mission to find out more about Max's past. The letter, though cryptic, was the key to unraveling the mystery. I'll always be with you. Please wait for me. I'll be back, the words echoed in my mind as I set out to find answers. I started asking around, speaking with local shopkeepers, neighbors, and anyone who might have seen Max before he started following me. After days of digging and making countless inquiries, I finally found someone who knew him, an elderly woman named Mrs. Langley who lived a few blocks away. She had seen Max around town, but she didn't know much about him, except that he used to belong to a man named Edward Langley. Edward, as it turned out, had been a kind-hearted man who had lived in the neighborhood for years. He had been an artist, known for his beautiful paintings of the town and its surroundings. Max had been his constant companion, always by his side, and the bond between them was unbreakable. But a few months ago, Edward had passed away unexpectedly, leaving Max behind. Since then, no one had been able to find out what had happened to the dog, until he started following me. When I returned to the cafe where I had found a letter, I noticed Max sitting at the same spot again, his eyes locked on the street as if he were waiting for something or someone. My heart ached for him as I crouched down beside him, speaking softly. I know, buddy. You're waiting for Edward, aren't you? Max didn't respond, of course, but his calm demeanor and the way he leaned into my touch made it clear that he understood. I looked around the area, hoping to find something that would lead me closer to the truth. That's when I spotted something unusual, a small rusted metal plaque, partially hidden behind a bush near the bench where Max had always waited. It was almost as if the plaque had been placed there intentionally, a hidden memorial of sorts. I dusted off the plaque and carefully examined the inscription. It read, "In memory of Edward Langley, the heart of our community." Beneath the words, there was a small, faded paw print. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized that this was the spot where Max had waited for Edward every day, hoping his owner would return. Max hadn't just been waiting out of habit, he had been waiting for closure, for the man who had loved him and cared for him to come back. But now, after all this time, it was clear that Edward wasn't coming back. The pain and longing in Max's eyes had never been about abandonment. It had been about grief, a grief that had been shared between two souls who had loved each other deeply. I sat down next to Max, my heart heavy with emotion, as I gently stroked his fur. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I never knew. But I promise you, Max, I'll take care of you from now on. You don't have to wait anymore." Max looked up at me, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding, as if he knew that he wasn't alone anymore. For the first time, I felt a sense of peace between us. Max's journey was far from over, but he was no longer waiting in vain. He had found someone who would honor his bond with Edward, someone who would care for him and help him heal. Just as I was about to stand up, ready to take Max home with me, I heard a voice from behind. "You've found him, haven't you?" It was Mrs. Langley, the elderly woman who had helped me piece together the puzzle. I turned to face her, nodding. "Yes, I have. I know now what he's been waiting for." Mrs. Langley smiled softly, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Max has always been loyal, just like Edward. But now he's found someone who understands him. You were meant to meet him, to help him heal." I reached out to gently pat Max's head, the bond between us solidifying with each passing moment. "I promise, I'll never leave him." Max looked up at me, his tail wagging for the first time in days. It was a small, simple gesture, but it was enough to tell me that he was no longer lost. He had found his way home. And so, in that moment, I realized that Max hadn't just followed me for days. He had been guiding me towards something I didn't even know I needed. A purpose, a connection, and a chance to heal my own heart. What started as a strange encounter between a stray dog and a lonely soul had turned into a bond that neither of us would ever forget. After the emotional discovery of Max's bond with Edward Langley, my commitment to taking care of him only grew stronger. But the journey was far from over. While Max and I began to form a deep connection, the community around us started to take notice of the stray dog story, and a ripple effect began to spread. The tale of Max's loyalty, his grief, and the bond he shared with his late owner captured the hearts of everyone who heard it. But it was more than just a story. It was a call to action. I made the decision to honor Edward's memory, and with Mrs. Langley's support, we started working on a plan to help Max and others like him. The idea was simple but powerful, a memorial fund dedicated to caring for stray animals, especially those like Max who had suffered from abandonment or loss. The fund would also help create a mobile veterinary clinic to reach animals in need throughout the community. Word of this effort quickly spread through local newspapers, social media, and word of mouth. People were moved by the idea, and many began to donate to the cause. It became more than just a memorial for Edward. It was a symbol of hope, a way for the community to come together and make a difference in the lives of animals that had been forgotten. I was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, but it also made me realize just how much work still lay ahead. Setting up the mobile clinic was no small task. It required funding, volunteers, and a network of local veterinarians who were willing to lend their expertise. But with Clara's help, we started organizing events, fundraisers, and even adoption drives to ensure that Max's legacy would continue. What had started as a small act of kindness to care for a stray dog now had the potential to change the lives of many others. Max, for his part, seemed to thrive in this new environment. As the mobile clinic took shape, he became the unofficial mascot of our efforts, a living testament to the power of loyalty and love. People would come to see him, to hear his story, and to offer their support. It wasn't long before Max had his own following, with local children coming to visit him, bringing treats and toys. They had all heard the story of the stray dog who had waited for his master, and now they saw Max not just as a symbol of loss, but of hope and healing. It was during one of the fundraising events that I realized how much Max had changed me. I had been hesitant at first to take him in, unsure of how it would affect my life. But now, as I stood with him at my side, watching the community come together to support a cause that was bigger than all of us, I understood the full impact of our connection. Max had given me more than I could have ever expected. He had given me purpose. But just as things were beginning to settle into a routine, a new complication arose. A man named Gerald Parker showed up at one of the fundraising events. He had heard about Max's story and claimed to be the rightful owner of the dog. He said he had known Edward years ago, and had even helped him care for Max during his illness. According to Gerald, Max had been with him before Edward's passing, and he wanted him back. At first, I didn't take Gerald seriously. His story sounded too rehearsed, too convenient. But as he continued to speak, his claims became more forceful, and he started threatening to take legal action. He hired a lawyer, and before I knew it, Max and I found ourselves embroiled in a battle that I had never anticipated. The community rallied behind me, but the legal pressure was mounting. Gerald began spreading rumors, claiming that Max had been neglected and that I was using his story for my own gain. The smear campaign against me and the fundraising effort grew more intense. It felt like everything we had worked for was starting to unravel. But despite the mounting stress and tension, I remained determined. Max had come into my life for a reason, and I wasn't going to let anyone take him away from me. Together with Clara, we fought back, gathering evidence of Gerald's false claims and the real story of how Max had been abandoned after Edward's passing. Our legal team worked tirelessly to build a case that would prove Max belonged with me, where he would be loved and cared for. The community's support didn't waver. As the legal battle continued, more people came forward to share their own stories of how Max had impacted their lives. It wasn't just about a dog anymore. It was about something greater. It was about community, compassion, and standing up for what was right. As the days passed and the tension between us and Gerald grew, I knew that the fight wasn't over yet. But I was more determined than ever to give Max the life he deserved, a life free from uncertainty, a life filled with love. And in the end, I knew we would prevail. Just as things were beginning to fall into place, the peace we had worked so hard to build was shattered by an unexpected twist. The man who had appeared at our fundraiser, Gerald Parker, was no ordinary individual. At first, I thought he was just another opportunist trying to exploit Max's heart-wrenching story for his own benefit. But as the days passed, it became clear that Gerald was not just a stranger with a questionable claim. He had something much more dangerous in mind. He wanted to take Max away from me, and he was willing to go to extreme lengths to make it happen. Gerald's initial appearance at the fundraiser was enough to raise suspicions, but it wasn't until his threats started escalating that I realized the true extent of his intentions. He had hired a lawyer, and with their help, he began a campaign to reclaim ownership of Max. His story was simple. He claimed that he had been Edward Langley's close friend for years, and that Max had lived with him before Edward's death. According to Gerald, he had been the one to help Edward care for Max during his final months. But as the details of his story unfolded, I couldn't help but feel that something was off. His version of events seemed carefully crafted to make him seem like the innocent party, when in reality, it felt like he was exploiting Max's loyalty for his own gain. But it wasn't just about a legal battle. It was about more than that. Gerald didn't just want Max for himself. He wanted to use him to capitalize on the emotional weight of his story. With the attention Max had garnered from his connection to Edward, Gerald saw an opportunity to turn Max into a cash cow. He began contacting media outlets, claiming that he was the dog's rightful owner and that I was simply using the dog's emotional story for profit. It wasn't long before his smear campaign began to spread like wildfire. The legal battle was just the tip of the iceberg. Gerald started filing lawsuits and making false claims about the care Max was receiving. He spread rumors that Max was being exploited by the fundraising efforts, turning people against the cause we had worked so hard to build. The media, always hungry for a sensational story, ate up every word of Gerald's accusations, and soon it felt like I was fighting a battle on multiple fronts against the legal system, the media, and even some of the people who had once supported us. As the situation worsened, I realized that this wasn't just a fight for Max anymore. It was a fight for what was right. Gerald was willing to tear apart everything we had worked for, all for the sake of a profit. And it wasn't just about the money. It was about his desire to control the narrative and exploit a dog's story for personal gain. The legal process was grueling. Every day felt like a new setback. Gerald's lawyer was skilled at spinning lies and making me appear as the villain in the situation. Meanwhile, Clara and I were doing everything we could to prove that Max belonged with me. We gathered evidence of the deep bond Max and I had developed, and we reached out to community members who had witnessed the positive impact Max had made in our lives. People came forward to testify about how Max had brought hope to the local animal shelter, how the fundraising efforts had helped so many other stray animals. But it wasn't just the legal battle that was wearing me down. Gerald's smear campaign took its toll. There were times when I wondered if the truth would even matter in the end. Every time the media ran another story about Gerald's claims, it felt like we were losing ground. But I refused to back down. Max had been through so much, and I had promised Edward that I would take care of him. I wasn't about to let someone like Gerald Parker take that promise away from me. In the face of all this, I realized that this was a test of character. Gerald's actions were designed to provoke me, to push me to the edge. But I couldn't let that happen. I had to stay calm, stay focused, and do what was right for Max. Every day, I reminded myself of the love and loyalty Max had shown me. He wasn't just a dog. I saw him as a symbol of everything that was good in the world. The love between Max and Edward had transcended death, and I was going to make sure that love didn't fade away. As Gerald's legal battle continued, I knew the stakes were higher than ever. But with each passing day, my resolve grew stronger. I wasn't just fighting for Max. I was fighting for the truth, for justice, and for everything that Edward had hoped for in his final days. Gerald Parker might have thought he could break me, but I was determined to show him that love and loyalty could never be taken away by lies or greed. The storm had been raging for weeks, and it felt like we were living in the eye of it, calm for a moment, but still unsure if it would spiral into chaos again. But just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the tide began to turn in our favor. The turning point came when our lawyer finally unearthed crucial evidence that shattered Gerald's false claims and discredited his entire smear campaign. It all started with a single photograph. Clara had been going through old files and records from the local animal shelter when she stumbled upon a picture of Max, taken just days before Edward's death. In the background of the photo, there was a familiar face, Gerald Parker, standing alongside Edward, both of them with huge smiles on their faces as they held Max. The photo wasn't just a snapshot of a moment. It was evidence that Gerald had never been the one to care for Max as he claimed. In fact, it proved that Gerald wasn't a part of Max's life until after Edward's death. This revelation was a game changer. We immediately shared the photo with our lawyer, and he used it as the foundation of our defense. The truth was undeniable. Gerald's story was built on lies, and the evidence was right there for everyone to see. We were finally able to discredit his version of events, showing the court that he had no legal or emotional claim over Max. But the legal victory wasn't the end of our battle. Gerald didn't take the defeat quietly. He made one last attempt to tarnish Max's story, launching a public campaign to discredit the emotional bond between me and the dog. He went as far as to suggest that I was only in it for the publicity and the donations. He couldn't accept that he had lost, not just the legal battle, but the hearts of the community. But with each new accusation, it became clearer that his character was the one in question, not mine. The media, who had once fed on his lies, started to turn the tide as well. With the truth out in the open, they began to highlight the real story, the bond between Max and me, and the way we had honored Edward's memory. People started to see us for who we really were. Two individuals, one human and one dog, who had been brought together by an incredible, unbreakable bond of loyalty and love. Finally, the legal battle came to an end. Gerald Parker's claims were officially dismissed, and he was ordered to pay for the legal costs associated with the case. The court had seen through his lies, and Max was officially declared mine. The feeling of relief that washed over me was overwhelming, but it was also bittersweet. The emotional toll this battle had taken on me, and on everyone who had supported us, was immeasurable. But as I looked at Max, his wagging tail and his trusting eyes, I knew that it had all been worth it. With Gerald out of the picture, Clara and I moved forward with our plans to honor Edward's legacy. We launched the Mobile Veterinary Clinic, a project that had once seemed like an impossible dream. It was something that Edward had always wanted to do, and now, thanks to the fundraising efforts we had started, we were able to make it a reality. The clinic would provide free medical care to animals in need, offering hope to those who didn't have access to the resources they needed. Max became the symbol of that hope. The community rallied around the cause, and donations poured in to support the clinic and the mission of helping stray animals. People from all walks of life, young and old, rich and poor, came together to contribute to the cause, all because of the incredible bond they had witnessed between Max and me. Max had become more than just a dog. He was a symbol of resilience, loyalty, and love. But perhaps the most fulfilling moment came when we held a ceremony to officially open the Mobile Veterinary Clinic. We invited everyone who had supported us, and we dedicated the clinic to Edward Langley, whose dream had made all of this possible. It was a day filled with emotions, but it was also a day of triumph. We had fought for what was right, and in the end, we had succeeded. Max stood beside me, his tail wagging as he watched the community come together to honor Edward's memory. I looked at him, and I realized that this journey had been about so much more than just a dog. It had been about love, loss, loyalty, and the power of community. We had all been brought together by a stray dog who had crashed a wedding ceremony, and through the highs and lows, we had come out stronger. As I stood there, surrounded by the people who had supported us, I knew that this was just the beginning. Max's story wasn't over, it was only just starting. The journey we had begun together was one that would continue to inspire others for years to come. As I stood there, looking at Max, surrounded by a community that had come together because of him, I couldn't help but reflect on how much this journey had changed my life. The lessons I had learned, the relationships I had built, and the way I had witnessed the power of love and loyalty, it was all so much bigger than I had ever imagined when I first met that stray dog. Max had started as just another lost soul in the street, a dog without a home. But now he was a symbol of resilience, of hope, and of the power of second chances. He had brought together a community that had once been divided, and in doing so, had changed lives in ways we never thought possible. As I watched people come to the mobile clinic, knowing they were receiving the care they desperately needed for their pets, I realized that this was only the beginning of the legacy we were building. The mobile clinic was more than just a place for animals. It was a beacon of kindness and compassion, a living testament to Edward's memory, and to the incredible bond between a man and his dog. It was a place where people could find not just medical help for their animals, but also a reminder that in this world, there are still moments of pure goodness. And so, as Max trotted alongside me, his tail wagging as we walked past the clinic, I knew that we were both on a new journey. One filled with challenges, no doubt, but also one filled with so much more hope than I could have ever imagined. Max had shown me that even the most unlikely of circumstances could lead to something beautiful. But the story doesn't end here. Max's journey, and the journey of everyone who helped make the mobile clinic a reality, is a reminder that we can all make a difference. We can all contribute to the betterment of the world in our own small way, and that no act of kindness is ever too small to matter. It doesn't take much, just a willingness to open your heart, a willingness to stand by those who need it most, and a willingness to fight for what's right. So if you found yourself inspired by this story of love, loyalty, and triumph, we invite you to join us on this journey. Max's story is just one of many, but together, we can create a world where stories like his are no longer the exception, but the rule. If you want to hear more stories that remind us of what truly matters in life, stories that will leave you with a sense of hope and inspiration, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Share these stories with your friends, your family, anyone who could use a reminder that love, loyalty, and kindness are what truly make the world go round. And as always, thank you for being part of this incredible journey with us. We can't wait to share more of Max's journey and the journeys of so many others with you.